Hey, it's Kristen, and I'm here with a tutorial for you on how you can upload your coloring book pages into the Procreate app and then do some coloring with them. So let's get started. As soon as you open up your Procreate app, you're going to have the gallery. And on the top right, you have some options here. One of them is to import a photo. So if you have an image saved in your camera device, you can upload it that way. Another way is, let me go back out by hitting gallery. You can choose to import. So if you have your photo saved somewhere on your device, such as iCloud, on your iPad, Dropbox, Google Drive, something like that. Mine's in the iCloud. I have a folder here. And here I have an image and also a PDF. Now you can see this is kind of grayed out, so when I try to tap it, nothing happens. And that's because Procreate doesn't allow the import of PDFs yet. But if I choose this PNG image, you can see that it will import as the other one did. So to be able to import a PDF, you have to convert it to a image file. So I'm going to hit the plus sign and open a blank canvas here. And then I'm going to go back out and I need to find where I saved my PDF file. I had mine in the cloud drive in the folder here, and now you can see it's not grayed out anymore, so I'm going to select that to open it. Now this is a PDF booklet, so there's several images here, so I'm going to find the one that I want, and you can see that it doesn't fit my screen right, so I'm going to turn my iPad so it's not in the landscape mode, now it's in the portrait mode, and now it fits much nicer. So I'm just going to make sure that it's lined up nicely, that I have room on all the edges, and I want to take a screenshot of that. So there is the home button and the sleep button. You're going to hit both of those at the same time, and that takes a screenshot for you. Press and hold on that little image, and now you can move it around. So I'm going to close out of my files, open Procreate, and you'll see that green plus sign. That means I could drop it in and it automatically imports that screenshot for me. And around the edges, you'll see it has the blue nodes, which will allow me to resize it if I need to. So if you touch any of those blue nodes, I want to make sure the bottom says magnetic because I don't want to lose my the form of the rectangle. So you can also try to choose fit to canvas to see if that works. Sometimes it'll be too big or won't fit correctly. So I'm just going to use the corner nodes and pull and drag those out because when I'm coloring this, I don't want that white border that is on the coloring page. You can choose to keep it there, but for the tutorial, I'm just going to remove that because I want this to be all one image. When you're finished, just hit the arrow and it will have cropped all of that off for you. Now I'm going to move this back around, and now it's the image itself. My iPad is in landscape mode, but the image is still in portrait mode. So to fix that, I'm going to go back into the gallery and using 2 fingers, just twist it, and now it will be back. The image will be back in portrait mode. And to delete the other 2 extras, I'm just sliding to the right and choosing delete. And now I just have this one image that I'm ready to start coloring on. But before I start coloring and choosing colors and choosing my brushes, there are some things I want to do within the layer itself. So I want to make this a reference layer. So to do that, you're going to tap the layer of your coloring page. And when you do that, you'll get a menu here that comes up and you're just going to choose reference. Now this makes it a reference layer, which means that everything that you do will be referenced from that layer. And this might make sense a little bit more down the road. Another thing that I also do is I want to name this layer. So I'm going to choose rename, and you can name it whatever you like. I'm just going to name it line art, so I know that this is where the actual line art is. So when I add colors later, I won't confuse those layers with this one. And finally, the other thing I'm going to do, and again, this is just me personally, what I do is I lock the layer. So if you slide it to the left, you can choose lock. That locks it, so then no changes can then be made to this layer. And the reason I do this is because I have a terrible habit of accidentally deleting this layer, and I don't want to do that. The next part is choosing colors for I like to use a color palette, so I have them pre-planned and ready to go. I'm using a palette here called Sunflower, and I have an entirely separate tutorial on creating your own color palettes within Procreate, so I'm not going to get into that. But I like to also choose the classic color palette picker here, so I'm going to be going with that. And I'm going to select this blue here, and going up I want to open my layers and make sure I'm on a new layer and selecting the blue. Whoops, I changed it to yellow. Let me put it back to blue. Okay, try again. Grab the blue, drag it down, and you can move it around to where you want to drop it, and then when you let go, it's going to flood that area with that color blue. So now you can see that I have the line art on one layer and the color blue on a separate layer. You can zoom in with your fingers and turn the canvas around just by pinching closed or pinching open. You can turn your canvas around and do all of this as you work. So I'm going to take that blue and drop it into all of the areas that I want to fill with blue. Now, if you happen to make a mistake like I did here, you can hit the back arrow to undo it or redo. You can also use the two-finger gesture. So just by tapping two fingers on the screen, you can undo it. Tapping three fingers on the screen will redo it. So I'm undoing and then putting the blue where it's supposed to go. Sometimes I put I drop the color onto the line instead of onto the white part, and because I'm going too fast, so a lot of times I will have to undo it, and there you have it. Now I'm just going to kind of look over and see if I missed any pieces that should be blue. I'm going to zoom in. I think this spot here should be blue, and that spot there. Just going to have a look around, and if I miss anything, it'll become obvious after we start coloring a lot more of it, and you could always go back in and fix that later. Another thing you might want to consider is keeping all of your colors on their own layers. So this blue section, I want it to have its own layer, and for every color that I use, or you can divide it by colors or by sections of the coloring page, you want to have them on their own layers, and you'll see why later. The main reason is because they're going to be much easier to manipulate or change if you need to. So using yellow, I'm going to drop that in there, and if I zoom in, you can see that you can't really see the black line too well. This means that you might want to adjust your threshold, and to do that, you're going to hold your pen on the canvas after you drop it, and at the top you'll see the threshold comes up, and if you slide your pen to the left or to the right, you will decrease or increase your threshold. So you're going to drag your pen without picking it up to where you like how filled your area is. So right about there, I'm going to let go, and then you can see that I've adjusted my color threshold that way. The next trick you're going to want to do is open up the layers and tap the little N, and in the blend mode here, you're going to select multiply. Now you can see that really brings out the lines, and the color is kind of behind the lines. And now you can drag and drop your colors right into those areas. But because it's going to be pretty tedious to have to do that for the whole page, I'm going to choose the select ribbon at the top and make sure my selection is on automatic. So now when I just tap in the area that I want to fill, it's going to select that area for me. And I'm just going to tap a bunch. I'm just going to tap all of the petals on this particular flower just to show you. I'm going to have to zoom in to get those smaller areas. But now all of the petals are selected. Go into your layer, and I want to fill my selected area, the areas that I selected, with the yellow in that layer. So I tap it and choose fill layer. And now you can see that it filled all the petals of that flower for me. Now it's going to be really tedious again to go through and do that for the whole page. So I'm just going to speed this video up and tap in all of the areas that I want to color. And here I'm just going to show you if I accidentally choose the line, just 2-finger tap to undo it, and then you can just continue on. Now with all of the petals selected, I'm going to tap on the layers, tap that layer and choose fill layer, and that's going to color in all of the petals that I had selected. And you could continue coloring the entire page this way, but I'm going to show you some other ways you could fill in some colors. In a new layer, I'm going to choose the brown color, and I'm going to go into the airbrush brushes and choose one. These are all native to the Procreate app. I'm going to change the size here. So you should have all of these brushes installed in your Procreate. I'm going to choose the hard airbrush to start with. Zoom in, and then I'm just going make sure I'm on the right layer and just start coloring. And now you can see it's coloring again over top of the lines. So we're going to have to go in and hit that multiply blend mode. So again, just tap the layer, tap the N, and then choose multiply, and then your color goes underneath the lines. And I'm going to continue doing that for each of the flower centers. Now you can choose to be as precise as you want. So for example, here I went outside the lines, so I'm going to choose my eraser tool, and you can choose a brush for your eraser. So I'm choosing the same one I'm working with, and then I'm just going to go in and erase that little bit that cut outside of the lines and go right back to my brush coloring in. Now I'm going to share a little Procreate hack that you might not know called Quick Shape. So if you draw a shape such as this as an arc and hold your pen, you get this option that says Edit Shape. So now you can go in and play with these blue nodes to move your shape around, change the size and position of it. And when you're happy with it, just tap off of it, and there you go. You have an automatic quick shape. Next, I want to color the outer layer of the inside of the flower. So I'm going to, again, go in and using my selection tool, just tap each of the areas that I want to color. And once I have those done, I'm going to make sure, there we go, I'm going to make sure I'm, again, in a new layer and tap fill layer with the color that I want. And I left some down here, so I'm just going to add those to the selection, go back into that layer and fill layer. Now you could just carry on with this method of coloring in, but if you want to add a little bit of style or flair to your coloring page, you can certainly do all of this in Procreate. Now as you're working, if you decide you want to change something such as the color, you can go in to where you have your colors on the layer, and this is another reason why I suggest having different layers for your colors. So let's say you want to change this to green. So you can just drag and drop, and that's just going to change that one area to green. Now if you go in and select the layer and go in and if you tap that layer and choose fill layer, it's going to fill the entire screen, okay, because you didn't have anything selected within that layer. So let me undo that. So if you select the layer and then choose fill layer, it's just going to fill in the pieces that were already on that layer. So now you can see all of those circles are filled in with green. And because I'm not crazy about the green, I really rather liked the darker brown. So I'm going to go back and select that layer and fill it all in with the dark brown again. Now next up, I want to add a little bit of depth to the inside of this checkered flower center. And to do that, I'm going to again create a new layer and go into my brushes. Actually, let me find a good color first. So I want a brown that's a little bit darker than the current brown, and change the size of my airbrush. And that's kind of not dark enough, so let me go in and make a little bit darker. Lower that, and that's a lot better. So I'm just going to go around the circle just to kind of create a little bit of a shadow around that. And again, you can see it's right over the lines, and that's okay because we have some tricks to get rid of that. Go into select, and I'm choosing Gaussian blur and moving that blue bar at the top over to about, I think 10% looks good. So I like that there. So now I'm going to go in. If we do what we did before and select multiply, you can see now that it made it darker, but it also went onto the outer ring, which we do not want. So we're going to change that back to normal, and instead what we're going to do is press and hold and move that down to above the layer of the original brown circles and choose clipping mask. And what that does is it acts as a stencil just for that layer that it's above. To create a highlight in this, I'm going to again, well actually instead of choosing a color, I'm going to go with whites. And I'm going to use, I think, the soft airbrush, see how that looks, and draw right on top of the lines. And I want this to kind of have the appearance of glass, so I'm going to do a Gaussian blur, but I'm not going to move this beneath the lines because I want this to kind of have a glossy, gemmy kind of feel to it. So again, these brushes are pressure sensitive with the Apple Pencil, so the lighter you press, the lighter the brush strokes will be, and the harder you press, the darker they will be. Another handy tool that we haven't touched on yet is the smudge tool, which is the little pointed finger hand up top here. And just like the eraser, you can choose any brush to use for the smudge. So this is going to kind of mix and blend and move all of your colors around together depending on the style of brush that you're using. So that's another way to blur things without using the Gaussian blur. It gives you a little bit more control over the areas that you want to smudge and blend and mix together. Okay, now let's do some more with these petals. I want to add a little bit more interest to them besides just having a flat yellow. So I'm going to choose the orange and go back into my brushes. I'm going to stick with the airbrushes for now and go in and play with the size and opacity. And I'm going to show you if I just draw on top of it, it again, like it has before, if it's not on multiply, it's going to cover up the line work that's there and just kind of sit on top of the rest of your work. So you can change that to multiply, and it's again going to put it below the line work. So I'm going to drag and drop this on top of the petal layer that I have and make it into a clipping mask layer. Another way is if I want to just add some shading to the petals that are behind. You can see it's kind of hard to do that with this size of a brush. So there's a couple things you can do. You can change the size of the brush to kind of fit into those lines, or you can go in and use the eraser tool and erase any of the color that went over. Again, this is kind of a really painstaking way to do this. It's going to get pretty tedious, but it is one way to do it. There is a simpler way to do it, and again, that's with the selection tool. So let me clear this and show you again using, let me go over and choose the selection and just tap the petals that I want to add some color to, and going in now and just lightly adding in some orange. You can see it's just placing it on the colors that I had selected, and that looks much nicer and is much easier than going back in and erasing everything. So following this method, you can go in and add color as you please, add color to the tips of the petals, the insides of the petals, wherever you like. I'm just playing here, and I'm not going to keep this. I just wanted to show you what it could look like, so I'm going to go in and hit clear. Now to tackle the text or the words on this coloring page, I'm going to follow the same method of dragging and dropping colors. So I'm going to select colors, and I want my words to be orange, so just going to drag and drop colors into there. And I want happy to stand out, so I'm going to change that to a bright yellow to kind of go with the sunflowers. And you can see here I kind of forgot to add that blue in, so I'm just going to change that to blue. And I'm not crazy about the dark border on this, so I'm going to clear that and reselect it on a new layer. I had it all on the same layer, so to be able to manipulate it, I need it on its own layer, so I can play around with it and kind of get a little bit get a little bit of trial and error to see what I like best. So I'm just gonna keep going around selecting the outline. With some of these you really have to zoom in to get those smaller bits, and I think that's all of them. So now back into my layers, and I'm going to choose the color I want, which is, I'm going to do the dark and then hit fill. And I can now see that there's a blue spot that I missed. So you can press and hold on the blue and it will bring up the blue for you. So you can just drag and drop that. To get the previous color back, just press and hold your color circle and it will select the previous color. And there's a bit there I missed. I need to really zoom in to get those little tiny spots. And I think we've got them all now. Now, because it's on its own layer, I can go in and start playing around with how I want it to look. If I didn't want to keep it this dark brown, I can go in and play with the color blends. I can play with the opacity by turning that down. You can see that it will lower the saturation of the color. I can go in and select a layer and make it into a different color, such as like this lighter brown here. So I'm going to fill the layer with the lighter brown, see how that looks. Still not crazy about that one. So if you get indecisive like me, instead of using colors, you might try to work more with textures to meet the needs of what you're going for. So to do that, I am going to import another photo of a texture. If you have a photo of a texture, you can use that. You can use textured brushes. But to import another photo, again, you're going to go to the add and then choose import a photo. And I have all of my backgrounds and textures saved in one folder just for this reason. So you can scroll through and find wherever you keep yours. And I kind of have an idea of what I'm looking for. I want kind of a brownish kind of cardboard box looking texture. There it is. I see it. Okay, so I'm going to choose that, and that inserts it right over the words. And now if I take that, I can make that into a clipping mask just by tapping the letter, tapping the layer and choosing clipping mask. And now if I zoom in, you can see that the outline now has that texture of that cardboard box look. But because I still don't really care for how this looks, it kind of washes out the words a little bit. And because I'm failing at finding what I want, I'm going to move on to another part of the picture. And by doing that, I might be able to come back to this at a later point and make a decision on how I want this to look. So for the blue background, I want to add a little perspective to it. So I want it to kind of have a dark around the edges and get white towards the middle. And to do that, I'm going to turn the layer above the blue into a clipping mask. So just tap that, choose clipping mask, and then you can choose your colors and start to paint on right onto that layer. Now I turned off all of the other layers because I just want to work within this one. So I'm going to fill the entire layer with black and then go in with the blues and start to create a little bit of a gradient with the original blue, a lighter blue, and then a little bit of white in the middle. And then I'm going to go up and hit it with a little Gaussian blur. That looks about good. And then if I turn on all of the other layers, you can see that it kind of has that gradient effect. It goes from dark to light. And another fun thing to do is within that layer is go in and play with your blend modes. So I like to just tap on each one to get the different effects that you're going to have. You can play with the opacity, turn that up or down to see which one is more to your liking. Go into the darken, the lighten, and just kind of tap around on each thing. That's really how you can learn best in Procreate. If you mess up, you can always undo it. But you can go through and just kind of see what each of these does to your artwork when they're selected. I'm going to go back and just pick normal, but I just want to show you what each of them, the different effects that it gives them. So I'm going to keep mine on normal and then move on to visiting what the outline of the text is. So I'm just turning off the dark outline of the text, and I actually kind of like it just white. So I might just leave that blank and not have any color there. And speaking of not having any color, if you go in and turn off your reference layer to get rid of all the line art, sometimes you might be surprised at what's left behind. You might get a really neat effect, especially if you're using watercolor brushes. This ends up looking really nice without the black lines in it. Okay, so I'm actually going to go back and finish what I started earlier, which was adding some orange to the petals of the flowers. And I'm going to do that process by choosing the select tool from that layer and then choosing each of the areas by tapping in each of the areas that I want to add some more orange to. And I'm going to speed up this video as I go through and make those selections. Okay, now that each of those areas are selected, I'm going back into my layers and adding a new layer above the yellow petal layers, choosing my orange, choosing a brush. I'm going to go back to find the airbrushes. And there we go. And I want to choose a soft brush for this. So, there we go, the soft brush, not the soft airbrush. And change the size of that, and then just kind of really with a light touch going in and just putting little pops of color peeking through from behind the petals. Okay, orange petals are done. And now I want to add a little bit of white to my petals to match the white that's in the lettering. So I'm going to select the word layer, hit select, and in a new layer, and here's where I'm going to change up my brushes. I'm going to use a brush with a little bit of texture to it that looks like a pencil brush. It's my Sketchy AF brush that I created, which can be found in my Procreate lettering bundle. And I'm just going to go right over each of these letters just to create a little bit of interest to it, to kind of make it look like a highlight, but I like the fact that it has a little bit of texture to it. So I'm going to speed this video up again just to get through this after I do each of these on the downstrokes of the letters. If that's too much of a contrast for you, go in and lower the opacity a little bit. I'm going to put mine to about 50%, I think, just so you can see it, but it's not overwhelming. And I've decided that I really like the white accents, so I want to add that white to the petals. So I'm choosing the petal layer, I'm going to select it, add a new layer, and I want to use the same brush so it has the same feel throughout the coloring page. And I'm just going to go in and add a little bit of white to one side of the middle lines that are going down each of the petals. And I really like how that looks. It's kind of tying the whole thing together. And I'm going to speed this up again. And I'm only going to do this to like every other flower. You can do it to as many flowers as you like, but I kind of like the fact that just a couple are showing a little bit of the highlights. All right, now I want to play around with the word happy because it's very yellow and I want to add a little bit of interest to it. So I want to add some orange shade to it like I did with the petals and the flowers. So I'm going to select that layer, add a new layer, and go choose the orange and go back and choose the airbrush that I used for, let me find my airbrushes. Yeah, I want to use the soft brush that I used for the petals. And then I'm just going to, again, lightly with a very soft touch, just start filling in from the bottom up and then from the top down to give it sort of an ombre gradient that goes from orange to yellow back to orange again. And I think this saying deserves a little bit of sparkle, so I have a brush in mind that I want to use to add a little bit of starburst. It is called Heavenly, and the brush is by Jenny Golan. It's one of her Procreate brushes that I downloaded. It's available in her Etsy shop. But if you have a similar brush or a star brush or any kind of starburst that you would like to add some glitter or something, you can certainly do that in this step. Okay, and now I am going to go back and revisit the centers of my flowers. As I started towards the beginning of the video, I only showed you one, so I'm going to speed this video up as I do the rest, following the same technique that I showed you earlier, just by Let me find the right size for this brush. Just by circling the outside of each of the flowers, and then we're going to apply a blur to those. All right, that looks great. Now I'm going to add the white highlights. So select white, back into select that layer that we were working on, and I'm going to actually delete that original highlighted layer that I have. Go back, select, add a new layer, and this time for the brush that I want to use one that's a little bit harder than the soft airbrush. So within the airbrush selection, I'm going to choose the hard brush and make that a little bit bigger, and just kind of go in and draw following the arc of the circle. I'm going to add some highlights, and then I'm going to, again, you know, Gaussian blur is like my favorite thing. I'm going to add some blur to this when I'm done. So those highlights are still looking a little too soft to me, so I'm going to add another layer on top of that layer we just did. Same brush, but I'm going to make it a little bit smaller, and I'm not going to blur it this time, but I'm just going to go in and just harden up a little line just so it looks more like a glossy kind of a reflection that you might see on a glass bead or a gemstone. Okay, so I think I am finally going to say I'm done with this coloring page. So when you're ready to share it, you go up into your wrench icon and you can choose the share arrow, and then decide which version you want to save it as. If you want it just as an image, you can choose the JPEG and you can save it right to your iPad, and then it's ready for uploading or sharing to social media. Thanks so much for watching this tutorial on digital coloring in Procreate, and I hope you made some amazing coloring pages.